Zimbabwe will be under a total lockdown for a period of 21 days. This means all our citizens are required to stay at home, except, of course, in respect of essential movements related to seeking health services, to the purchase and procurement of food and medicines, and for other essential supplies and critical services.
Zimbabwe recorded its first COVID-19 case on the 21st of March 2020, sending the poverty-ravaged country into panic mode.
The pandemic came to burden an already burdened economy and also the health system, which was already on its knees.
The government just enforced a lockdown without thinking about how these people are going to survive in terms of accessing food, in terms of accessing other services. So that was something that we noted.
You realize some people were now blaming COVID on the gay and queer community, saying it was brought up because people are engaging into this behavior. And other effects are, you realize people were locked down with hostile and toxic families. So you realize most people were also then exposed because they now have more time at home.
It plunged a lot of families into turmoil, into serious hunger, into serious food deficits, into serious financial challenges.
Mafuta chachema uke hamuna. Ndakutongonopa vana hufu nenhingine soti kumbo kuti vadya. Nditorina kana chokudya izvo kumba. Muchationa tiri mumba memeka takatovharirwa tafa nenzara nevana. Todyei 27 days ka 10 kg kakasvike 27 nhingi 21 days dziperere. Ndaomerwa.
The creative sector was the most affected.
The queer community was part of the most hard hit.
People with disabilities, they live below the poverty line, and that affected them in a number of ways.
It affected more women and girls and women with disabilities who had to face a twined pandemic of COVID-19 and also gender-based violence.
We became a sector that was heavily affected. Live shows were cancelled for almost 18 months, despite the fact that others then went digital. But the honest truth is we became a sector that was affected in terms of income, in terms of productivity, and in terms of the livelihoods of families that depend squarely on the artists or squarely on the creative practitioners.
People with disabilities, they live below the poverty line. Now, given that they are not employed, they are being forced to stay at home, and they were struggling to put a simple meal on the table.
The lockdown period saw some of the most or the worst human rights abuses because they would arrest you. The Constitution allows people to support you or to protest or to come to court. They would use lockdown regulations to say you cannot move. So it was difficult for people to support each other.
Our police used the force. They would beat up people to ensure that they enforced the lockdown. Yes, the lockdowns were a necessary mechanism to contain this particular pandemic. However, we didn't actually expect the government to use maximum force. We expected them to convince the people. We expected the government to persuade the public so that they can actually see the importance of respecting these lockdowns.
The international community, comprising of NGOs and other sympathetic countries and allies, assisted with massive donations ranging from PPE, sanitizers, drugs, ventilators, vaccinations, and financial resources. For a country that has scored 24 out of 100 on the corruption index, this presented an opportunity for corruption and mismanagement of COVID resources.
Some saw it as an opportunity to steal from the state coffers. But at the end of the day, those who suffer are actually those who are more vulnerable in communities.
I think there have been many alleged cases of manipulation of COVID-19 funds, of corruption surrounding COVID-19 funds.
An online journalist, Hopewell Chingono, picked up a suspicious transaction in the procurement process. A few months later, the health minister was fired for awarding a foreign-based company a multi-million-dollar contract to supply PPE, test kits and drugs at inflated prices. Additionally, he is alleged to have coerced Treasury to pay for 15,000 coronavirus test kits, when after inspection, only 3,700 kits were found. The coronavirus had teamed up with an evil twin: corruption.
This is where we saw the rise of various forms of corruption, such as petty corruption, you have your bribery, sextortion in some instances, and so basically there were lots of varying corruption traits that were realized.
They were announced they received so much money from this donor, they received so much money from UNESCO, they received so much money. But when you go to the ground, you don't see the money itself. When the Minister of Finance at some point said they were disbursing around, was it 600 million in 2020? And then the Minister of Education then, Kane Watema, said it was for drilling bores. But we made a follow-up and said, where are the new bores? We didn't see many of those bores. Even when the recent disbursement by the Ministry of Finance, you try to go around the country to see where the money is. You don't find it in the schools. You see in the schools, you see desperation. But on paper, you see big figures being disbursed from UNICEF, being big figures coming from UNESCO. But when you go to schools, you see just desperate.
There was no money that came to people. Up to now, people are asking, where did those names go? Because nothing came about.
All these cases are indicative of some of the institutional weaknesses within the public procurement process. For example, our procurement process is not strong enough or is not strengthened yet to ensure to deal with some of the irregularities that occur, especially during emergencies. Secondly, these cases are also indicative of abuse of power or abuse of unchecked power by public officials. And this is very, very synonymous with systems where there is limited accountability and limited transparency.
COVID-19 allowances were paid to SMEs, vulnerable members of the community, and individuals were identified and assessed at district social welfare offices and Ministry of Women Affairs, Small and Medium Enterprises, and Cooperative Development provincial offices, amongst other stakeholders.
I don't think any citizen ever received those COVID relief funds. I think they were much in the newspapers, they were in the media. We have tried to engage not only the teachers, but even those in the informal economy, just to check how much they've been accessing those resources, because you understand we are a class, we are not just teachers, but we believe we are a broader working class, we are part of the broader exploited poor majority. So we also take time to exchange notes, to appreciate what is going on in other sectors. We are still to encounter people who have been beneficiaries to that relief fund, and honestly, it's very unfortunate that at a time where we really needed our government the most, the government never stepped up. This is why we have 50% of learners who were supposed to be sitting for examinations this year failing to sit for those examinations because the COVID-19 situation negatively impacted on our people without any social protection. So 50% of learners who are supposed to be candidates this year are not writing exams because they are now very vulnerable because of the COVID-19 induced poverty, and our government failed to step in. We have over 1 million learners who have dropped out of school completely because of the challenges that they are facing because of the COVID-19 induced lockdowns. So really we asked you to see these interventions on the ground. We made the interventions in the newspapers and other media outlets.
I think whoever is responsible for that was not, I'm speaking for persons with disabilities. They were not fair. They didn't, we constitute 15% of the population, and it's a big number. And most of us are wailing in poverty. Most of us are struggling to make ends meet. So when we are promised that there's going to be maybe a grant of some sort, there's going to be monies of some sort, there were a number of messages circulating where people were being asked to provide their names, ID number, and their personal details. And most of us, we did that, but we never got, we never got any notification that we were going to receive the money. We never got anything even from the social welfare, notifying us that, we are going to receive the money. So as for persons with disabilities, I think the government should put people with disabilities as a priority when they are strategizing, when they are putting their house in order, not just to think of us as an afterthought, maybe when some people want to be voted for, when people, want something from the disability community.
Kunoku hatina zvatakambowana rubatsiro rwakambouya. Hatina kuigamuchira kudai ichiri mushiri.
Takangonzwa vamwe vachiti mavo mufoni dzapinda. Ini mangu haina. Because takazotodanwa kuward center uko zvichinzi uya mugadzirise mafoni namba yenyanga akakanganisika, tikandogadzirisa. Wiki iyoyo zvikanzi muchaiona mari yapinda nanhasi kana kuiona. Takazonzwa vamwe vototi yedu yapinda rwechi2. Isu nanhasi hatinoiona mari iyo.
Handina kumbeiwana. Ndinotaura zvechokwadi. Vamwe totonzwa yatopinda rwepiri. Tikati aiwa. Handina kumbeiwana. Ndichitobvunza kuti inombopuwa vakadiko. Yakandonyorwepiko. Isu hatina kumbosangana nazvo.
There was communication that COVID relief funds will be distributed. However, not many people are able to identify who was actually awarded this COVID-19 relief, who were the beneficiaries, what was the money used for. The COVID-19 relief funds, they've come in various forms along the sporting codes. Sporting codes were identified as recipients of COVID-19 funds. The entertainment sector was identified as recipients of the COVID-19 funds, even vulnerable communities, vulnerable families. And I think transparency involves maybe publishing lists of who received these funds, where did these funds go, were these funds distributed along party lines? These are some of the fundamental questions which people continually ask on an everyday basis. And I think it's up to government to ensure that it becomes transparent in its conduct.
Yeah, personally, I haven't heard of anyone who received those funds. I know quite a lot of very vulnerable people who one would expect would if there is any algorithm which is actually doing its job, would have been identified as those who are worthy candidates for receiving that kind of cushioning money. And to my knowledge, I haven't heard of anyone who actually received those funds.
Government is highly recommended to demonstrate political will to stop corruption by fully capacitating the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission so that it undertakes its mandate without fear or favor.
I think we need to put systems in place which make sure that there is transparency whenever we receive such funds, which makes sure that all the procedures are followed, or the money is going to where it's supposed to be going, so that when the money reaches to the people, we can all testify to that we've received the money, if it was meant for the mask or whatever it was meant to. As the people, once we are happy, we can acknowledge and say, yeah, the money got to the people.
One such monitoring mechanism is the ZimCOD COVID-19 Resource Tracker, which is an internet-based tracking system that tracks resources pledged, received, and utilized on a daily basis. This has increased transparency around COVID-19 resources, which in turn will help plug corruption holes as it increases transparency and accountability.
I think the only recommendation should be making sure that all minority groups are represented within the COVID response, be it within the committees, because you realize the COVID response at the end of the day was then decentralized. There were provincial task forces, there were also district task forces, etc. If only we had community members or queer folks who were also present in those, or a group of vulnerable and marginalized communities, then it's definitely issues of queer folks would have been attended to.
Institutions should be respected, and those who are found guilty of abusing state resources should be punished by law. We cannot have a situation where Zimbabwe is well known for catch and release. Someone is arrested in the morning and in the afternoon that person is released, yet you see human rights defenders are being persecuted. Between March to date, we have recorded more than 80 cases of women human rights defenders who have been arrested in one way or the other simply for exercising their right to association and freedom of expression, which is something that is unacceptable as these rights are protected by the law. So you see there has been a selective application of the law. Those who are demanding accountability, transparency are being punished, yet those who are stealing and taking from the state coffers are going scot-free.
Number one, arrest those who are involved in that and actually prosecute them to finality, because that's where we haven't seen. We've seen this catch and release, but people are not being prosecuted to finality. But secondly, on that third point, don't arrest those who are exposing the corruption. That's what we've seen in Zimbabwe, where someone, for example, like the journalist Hope Chingono, exposes corruption in procurement of COVID-19 materials, and then is arrested in response to that. That doesn't assist with transparency, and it doesn't assist with building trust among the citizenry that actually the government is doing everything that they can to ensure that the COVID-19 response is going to best serve the people.
The government must resist in taking a very restrictive approach towards these pandemics, towards engagement with citizens, towards engagement with electoral stakeholders. They must be more proactive, they must be more open, they must be more accommodating in how they conduct themselves, because issues around elections are very touchy. It's a topic which inflames emotions, and I think once it becomes a more inclusive, once it becomes a more accommodating process, then it will be able to get citizen buy-in. Right now, we are witnessing the suspension of by-elections, and people continually ask when are by-elections going to be held. Regionally, almost every country in SADC has held some form of election or by-election ever since the COVID pandemic occurred, and questions still maintain on why Zimbabwe remains the odd one out in terms of election administration, why we continue to suspend elections indefinitely when there are clear signs that elections can be held under a pandemic.
Civic society and the media should be given unlimited access to records and distribution exercises so as to enhance transparency and accountability.
It's important for people like myself as journalists to continue doing our work, because journalism is about holding the powerful to account for their actions. They use taxpayers' money, and if we stop exposing that as journalists, it can only get worse.
Civil society plays a critical watchdog role. It plays a critical facilitatory role. It plays a critical organizing role of society and stakeholders to be able to put in place accountability frameworks and mechanisms to ensure that resources are hedged and ring-fenced for their purposes. Without civil society, I do not think that we'll be able to have a society that is willing to be put under public scrutiny. I believe that civil society can hold accountable anyone, because we do not belong to any political party. We are not government arms. So if Parliament is not playing its role, we can call it to order. If the judiciary is not playing its role, we should be able as rights holders to say the judiciary is no longer representing the people. If ZAC, if the Human Rights Commission, if any government, including the president himself, if he's not playing it, we have that, we have that mandate from where we are sitting in terms of society and connecting with society and our membership to be able to call them to order when it comes to issues of accountability. That is how I see civil society playing a complementary role, playing a watchdog role, a facilitatory role to have accountability and transparency in society.